Moreover, it is not just the executive branch that has been tearing at the fabric of the Constitution. Through its partisanship, complacency, and corruption, Congress has done much to ensure that the crisis of the American Republic will be fatal to democratic government. As constitutional specialist Noah Feldman writes, "For the last 4 years, a Republican Congress has done almost nothing to rein in the expansion of presidential power. This abdication of responsibility has been even more remarkable than the president's assumption of new powers." Al Gore, who served 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate, and presided over the Senate for 8 years as vice president, observes, "The sharp decline of congressional power and autonomy in recent years has been almost as shocking as the efforts by the executive branch to attain a massive expansion of power. Moreover, in the Congress as a whole, both House and Senate, the enhanced role of money in the re-election process, coupled with the diminished role for reasoned deliberation and debate, has produced an atmosphere conducive to pervasive institutionalized corruption. It is the pitiful state of our legislative branch that primarily explains the failure of our vaunted checks and balances to prevent the dangerous overreach of the executive branch, which now threatens a radical transformation of the American system." I happen to be a registered voter in the 50th Congressional District of California in northern San Diego County, where in early 2006, our Republican representative for the previous 14 years, Randy Duke Cunningham, received the longest sentence to a federal prison, 8 years and 4 months, ever imposed on a member of Congress. Cunningham, a decorated Vietnam War pilot, confessed to pocketing $2.4 million, the largest bribe ever paid to a member of Congress. He had used his official positions on the Appropriations and Intelligence Committees to see that contracts worth millions of dollars went to defense manufacturers who had paid him off, and he did this primarily by adding classified earmarks to the defense appropriation bills and pressuring Pentagon officials to buy things they had made clear they did not want. The term earmarks is congressional jargon for spending by a lone representative, who surreptitiously tax expenditures onto a larger appropriations bill that the House then passes without further scrutiny. Well before the bribery charges were filed, I described Cunningham in the press as totally bought and paid for by the military-industrial complex. However, I did so on the basis of published campaign contributions. It did not occur to me that in selling his vote to munitions makers, as so many other members of Congress have done, including Cunningham's friend, neighbor in California's 52nd District and chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Republican Representative Duncan Hunter, he was so stupid as to have actually accepted material bribes for his corrupt acts. If a member of Congress can claim there was no quid pro quo involved in accepting money from strangers, it is technically legal. Most members who want to line their pockets are content to wait and do so as lobbyists after retiring or being defeated. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, Hunter and Cunningham rank second and third among all members of Congress. First is Pennsylvania Democratic Representative John P. Murtha, in terms of the total amount of money they have received from the defense industry. In buying Cunningham's influence, 2 San Diego-based defense contractors, Mitchell Wade, CEO of the MZM Corporation, which among other things provided Arabic translators for Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad, and Brent Wilkes, CEO of the ADCS Corporation, Incorporated, supplied Cunningham with cash, a down payment and mortgage payments on a 7,628-square-foot mansion in an exclusive San Diego enclave, Persian rugs, antique French armoires, 2 yachts, a Rolls-Royce, and a college graduation party for his daughter. In return, Cunningham arranged for $163 million in Pentagon contracts for MZM Corporation, which had not done much business with the Defense Department until Wade met him, and more than $90 million for Wilkes Company for converting old documents into computer-readable files. Wilkes wanted to digitalize the century-old archives dealing with the building of the Panama Canal, not exactly vital to the global war on terror, and something Pentagon officials repeatedly insisted they did not need. Senior correspondent for the American Prospect, Laura Rosen, notes, Duncan Hunter was identified by a Defense Department Inspector General report, along with Cunningham, as actively intervening with the Pentagon to try to award a contract to a document conversion company that had given him tens of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions for a program the Pentagon did not request or consider a priority. Wilkes technology was imported from Germany. It is important to stress that the distinction in Congress between a bribe and a legal donation is a bit of sophistry intended to conceal the routine corruption of our elected representatives. As Bill Moyers has put it, if in baseball a player sliding into home plate reached into his pocket and handed the umpires $1,000 before he made the call, what would we call that? A bribe. And if a lawyer handed a judge $1,000 before he issued a ruling, what would we call that? A bribe. But when a lobbyist or CEO, chief executive officer of a corporation, sidles up to a member of Congress at a fundraiser or in a skybox and hands him a check for $1,000, what do we call that? A campaign contribution. Brent Wilkes was more experienced at buying influence than Wade. He supplied private jet flights for House Majority Leader Tom DeLay and Republican Roy Blunt, and became a pioneer in the Bush-Cheney 2004 re-election campaign by raising $100,000. From 1995 to 2005, Wilkes and his associates gave more than $840,000 to at least 32 congressional campaigns or their political action committees. According to the Federal Election Commission, the recipients included Representative John Doolittle, Republican from California, total $82,000; Representative Randy Cunningham, $76,500; Representative Jerry Lewis, Republican from California, $60,000; Representative Tom DeLay, Republican from Texas, $57,000; Representative Duncan Hunter, $39,200; Senator Larry Craig, Republican from Idaho, $29,000; Representative Jerry Weller, Republican from Illinois, $27,500; Representative Benjamin Gilman, Republican from New York, $25,843; Representative Roy Blunt, Republican from Missouri, $17,000; and Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, $14,000. The culprits are not just Republicans. Consider the actions of the senators from Florida in 2006. In the 2006 federal budget, Republican Senator Mel Martinez earmarked defense appropriations for Florida contractors worth $316 million. Since 2003, companies that received defense contracts made $33,000 worth of campaign contributions to Martinez. Democratic Senator Bill Nelson, a member of the Armed Services Committee, obtained $960 million for defense projects, about two-thirds of which went to the Florida-based plants of Boeing, Honeywell, General Dynamics, Armor Holdings, and other munitions makers. Since 2003, Nelson has received $108,750 from 13 companies for which he arranged contracts. Under such circumstances, it is still possible to imagine that some congressional votes in areas where money is flowing are not being influenced by campaign contributions, but only if the members are independently wealthy, and even then it is highly unlikely. There are, in addition, other ways to influence Congress, particularly through lobbying. The numbers of lobbyists, the amounts of money involved in lobbying, and the ties between the lobbying industry, the dominant Republicans in Congress, and the White House have all exploded in the Bush years. Since Bush was elected, according to Bill Moyers, the number of lobbyists registered to do business in Washington has more than doubled. That's 16,342 lobbyists in 2000 to 34,785 in 2005. 65 lobbyists for every member of Congress. In September 2005, Tom DeLay was forced to resign as Majority Leader of the House when he was indicted for channeling corporate contributions to politicians in Texas. He was the chief conduit of master lobbyist Jack Abramoff, who in January 2006 confessed to cheating his clients while spending lavishly on congressional junkets, meals, and campaign contributions. Some 29 former staff members of DeLay's congressional office have left government service to accept positions as lobbyists in major Washington law firms, the largest number working for any member of Congress. Typical of the DeLay-Abramoff operations was their lobbying for the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands. After World War II, these specks of land in the Pacific, 5,625 miles west of San Francisco, the largest of which is the island of Saipan, became a United Nations Trust Territory administered by the United States Department of the Interior. Under a scheme to make Saipan a sweatshop, the Interior Department exempted the islands from U.S. labor and immigration laws. There is no minimum wage on Saipan. Tens of thousands of Chinese women live in dormitories with no basic political rights. They are prohibited from marrying and are paid almost nothing. They work producing clothes with Made in the USA labels for companies like Levi Strauss & Company, The Gap, Eddie Bauer, Reebok, Polo, Nordstrom, Lord & Taylor, and Liz Claiborne, which are then shipped duty-free to the United States. The sweatshop operators, the biggest of whom are naturalized U.S. citizens of Chinese ancestry, paid Abramoff nearly $10 million, part of which he used to book congressmen and their significant others into luxury hotels and exclusive golf courses on Saipan, to ensure that Congress did not pass a minimum wage law for the islands. Abramoff took DeLay and his wife there, and the congressman was moved to declare that the Marianas represented what is best about America, calling them My Galapagos. Other major clients of the Abramoff-DeLay lobbying duo include gambling casinos on Indian reservations, Russian oil and gas interests, and the U.S. Family Network. The mainstream press regularly refers to members of Congress as lawmakers, but that phrase bears little relationship to what they actually do. An excellent example is the Foreign Operations Bill for fiscal year 2005. At the time of passage, according to Los Angeles Times correspondent Ken Silverstein, it was the biggest single piece of pork barrel legislation in American history. On November 17, 2004, a small group of senators and representatives from their respective appropriations committees folded into the bill funds for the Departments of Justice, State, Energy, Labor, Commerce, Education, Agriculture, Transportation, the Treasury, Interior, Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services, and Housing and Urban Development, as well as the running expenses for the entire legislative and judicial branches. Around 12:15 a.m. on November 20, 2004, staff members, working frantically, made the 3,320-page bill available to legislators on the website of the House Rules Committee. The House put it to a vote at approximately 4 p.m. in the afternoon of the same day, and the Senate followed suit at 8:42 p.m. that evening. The legislation passed the House by a margin of 344 to 51, and the Senate by 65 to 30. It would have been a physical impossibility for any member to have read the entire piece of legislation in the time available, much less thought about what it involved. The bill included 11,772 separate earmarks, worth a combined total of nearly $16 billion. Silverstein observes, "Of who added these grants, no public record exists." Earmarking of defense spending has more than tripled since fiscal year 1995, and the Department of Defense's black budget, which is secret from all citizens and virtually all members of Congress, was estimated at the end of 2005 at $28 billion per year, $14.2 billion for purchases of hardware, and $13.7 billion in so-called research and development expenditures. According to Citizens Against Government Waste, in 1995, Congress approved 1,439 earmarked appropriations. In 2005, the number had risen to 13,998. Gordon Adams, Director of Security Studies at George Washington University and a former White House Budget Director for National Security, notes that members of such influential congressional committees as Intelligence and the Defense Subcommittees of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees have a lot of power and are sitting in a place where a lot of money flows. There are huge opportunities here for politicians to tweak the system to their advantage. The smell of corruption is in the air. Franklin Spinney, for 30 years a budget analyst in the Pentagon, said in a discussion with Bill Moyers, "The military-industrial congressional complex is a political economy with a big P and a little e. It's very political in nature. Economic decisions, which should prevail in a normal market system, don't prevail in the Pentagon or in the military-industrial complex. So what we have is a system that essentially rewards its senior players. We have a term for it. It's a self-licking ice cream cone." Moyers pointed out that pay for chief executive officers at Lockheed Martin went up from $5.8 million in 2000 to $25.3 million in 2002. At General Dynamics, from $5.7 million in 2001 to $15.2 million in 2002, and at Northrop Grumman from $7.3 million in 2000 to $9.2 million in 2002. Spinney explained that a main lobbying strategy of the military-industrial complex is to emphasize to members of Congress how many jobs are dependent on a particular contract being approved, rather than the usefulness or feasibility of a weapon. Lobbyists' letters and presentations to members of Congress always include maps showing precisely the communities that will be enriched by Pentagon spending and the funds they will receive. Coming at it from a somewhat different political perspective is Winslow Wheeler, from 1996 to 2002 the senior analyst for national security on the Republican staff of the Senate Budget Committee, and before that an aide to Senators Pete Domenici, Republican from New Mexico, Jacob Javits, Republican from New York, and Nancy Kassebaum, Republican from Kansas. After 30 years working on Capitol Hill, Wheeler retired and devoted himself to revealing the systemic problems that reduce government to an exploitative system and make it possible for special interests to manipulate it at will. He has documented how senators added $4 billion in useless pork projects to benefit their own states immediately after the 9/11 attacks, including Senator Robert Byrd, Democrat from West Virginia, who strongly opposed going to war against Iraq, but nonetheless asked for funds to build an Army museum in his home state. Senator Ted Stevens, Republican from Alaska, one of the stalwarts of the missile defense lobby, because most of the ground-based interceptors are located in silos in his state, asked for post-9/11 funds to build parking garages for automobiles, not missiles. Wheeler's major study, Wastrels of Defense, How Congress Sabotages U.S. Security, was not brought out by a leftist or liberal publisher, but by the Naval Institute Press. He draws on his own experience to explain how dependent most members of Congress are on their staffs, and how most staff officials spend their time inserting earmarks and add-ons to defense bills, rather than actually trying to determine how the money of the people of the United States should be spent to achieve security. Between fiscal years 2001 and 2002, just as Wheeler's career in the Senate was coming to an end, so-called add-ons, that is, unrequested spending for the Pentagon, jumped from $3.3 billion to $5.4 billion, not including, in 2002, $583 million for 32 projects added at the last minute by the House-Senate Conference Committee for items neither requested by the Pentagon nor included in the House or Senate bills. Wheeler presents numerous examples of how pork projects inserted into legislation to favor special interests undermined or took the place of serious defense projects. He notes that whereas defense appropriations bills in the late 1980s might have had as many as 200 or 300 pork items, in 2005 or 2006 a bill contains thousands. His argument is that after more than 2 centuries, the systems of checks and balances built into our government by the Constitution no longer works.